March in Indiana is a weird time of year. It's not winter, it's not spring, it's just a gray, indecisive mess of sleet and wind that makes you wonder if the sky itself is going through a midlife crisis. And there I was, standing in the middle of our garage, watching the automatic doors slowly creak open like it had something important to say. It didn't. It just groaned and let in the wind. I was looking for a wrench. That's how it started. Not the story, but the scene. The garbage disposal had made a sound that resembled a dying harmonica, and I figured I could fix it myself. That illusion lasted right up until I realized I'd lost half my tools in our last move. A relocation Shirley insisted would bring us closer to the good school district, even though we didn't have kids. I remember nodding, thinking maybe she had a long-lost passion for learning algebra again. So, I'm digging around, cursing the wrench, the disposal, and possibly the concept of plumbing as a whole, when I spot something that doesn't belong. Tucked behind a stack of old boxes labeled Christmas junk, Gary's high school crap, and the always helpful miscellaneous, is a red plastic bin I don't recognize. And trust me, I know my bins. I'm a bin guy. I label. I organize. I even color code like a man who once read a blog post titled, "Taking Back Your Garage." But this red bin, it's rogue. No label. No duct tape. No faded sharpest scribbles. Just sitting there like it had snuck in overnight. Naturally, I opened it. Wouldn't you? Inside, I found theater props. Yep. A glittery blue masquerade mask, a rolled-up program from something called A Midsummer's Waffle, which I later Googled. Turns out it's an amateur comedy show about brunch, and a collection of Polaroid photos that made my eyebrows perform acrobatics I didn't know they could manage. First, the photos were not of us. And I say not of us in the most enthusiastic way possible. They were of Shirley, and someone else. Someone with a mustache that could apply for its own zip code. They weren't doing anything scandalous. No kissing, no inappropriate touching. But they were in costume, holding hands on stage, looking like a rom-com promo for people who collect antique irons and listen to jazz ironically. Still, not proof of anything, right? Maybe it's just a play. Community theater. Harmless hobby. I could be a supportive husband. I could say something chill like, "Hey honey, loved your interpretive brunch skit." Very bold. Except Shirley never mentioned being in a play. Ever. I'd have remembered. You don't just forget your wife joining the thespian underground. So I did what any reasonable, totally non-paranoid husband would do. I put everything back exactly how I found it. Mask, program, photos, the whole brunch-themed circus. And then I made a cup of instant coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and waited. Shirley came home around 4:30 p.m., wearing a turtleneck that made her look like an off-duty philosophy professor. She breezed past me, tossed her keys in the ceramic bowl that says, "Home is where your charger is," and headed straight for the fridge. "How was your day?" she asked, voice light, casual, like we were in a toothpaste commercial. "Enlightening," I replied, taking a sip of my lukewarm coffee. She didn't catch the tone. Shirley never catches the tone, which is either a superpower or a survival mechanism. She pulled out a container of lentil salad, the kind that tastes like edible mulch, and sat across from me. "Did you fix the sink?" "Nope, but I did fix my understanding of regional theater." She paused mid-fork. "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me. Turns out our garage is a veritable treasure trove of dramatic history." Now, I should note something about Shirley. She doesn't lie like normal people. She doesn't stammer, doesn't look away. No, Shirley lies with a sort of misplaced elegance, like she's playing chess, and I'm still arguing over the rules of checkers. She blinked slowly, set her fork down, and tilted her head. "What are you talking about, Gary?" "Oh, you know, the mask. The program. The man with the foliage growing out of his upper lip. The photo of you in a feather boa that, frankly, raised some new questions." She stared at me for a beat, then smiled. "You went through my stuff?" "Nope. I went looking for a wrench and found your secret life as brunch-themed Juliet. Those are just props from a fundraiser. For the rec center." "Uh-huh. And the mustache guy?" "Darryl. He teaches pottery. It was all a joke. A performance thing." "A performance? That involved you holding hands and wearing matching velvet." She leaned back, folding her arms like she was preparing to defend her thesis on gaslighting your husband via brunch plays. "Gary, you're overreacting." "See, here's the thing, Shirley. If I was overreacting, I'd be holding a glitter mask in one hand and dramatically fainting onto the table. I'm merely reacting. Fairly. To evidence. Tangible, photographic brunch-based evidence. She stood up, walked over to the sink, rinsed her fork like she was erasing a confession. "I didn't cheat on you," she said casually. I nodded slowly. "No, of course not. You just emotionally invested yourself in an avant-garde omelet routine with a man who looks like he owns 3 ferrets and a jazz zine." That one got her. Her lips tightened, her jaw set. But she didn't argue. She didn't explain. She just dried the fork and walked upstairs, like the conversation had been about whether or not we needed more paper towels. And that's when I realized something. I wasn't angry. I wasn't devastated. I wasn't even shocked. I was amused. Because in all the ways I thought this marriage might unravel, job stress, growing apart, me finally telling her that her quinoa casserole tasted like regret, I never imagined it would be, because Shirley joined a secret society of theatrical brunch enthusiasts and forgot to mention it. And you know what? That was just the beginning. I've learned that nothing good in life ever comes from a rec center. You either end up playing basketball with guys who grunt more than they speak, attending a yoga class where the instructor seems suspiciously high on something herbal, or, if you're Shirley, you join a community performance fellowship that apparently requires themed costumes and physical closeness with pottery instructors named Darryl. It had been 3 days since the garage incident. Shirley continued operating like a woman who believed firmly in the power of pretending everything was fine. She maintained her daily routine with all the enthusiasm of a DMV clerk. Morning smoothies that resembled wet cement, 10-minute debates with herself in the mirror about whether cranberry was too aggressive a lipstick for a Tuesday, and a goodbye wave so robotic I started saluting it out of sarcasm. I didn't bring up the photos again. I had no interest in repeating the conversation where she tried to pass off theater intimacy as community outreach. I decided to do something smarter, go to the rec center myself. Now, this was a risky play. I'm not what you'd call a joiner. I've spent most of my adult life avoiding anything with a clipboard or matching t-shirts. But I needed answers, and Shirley sure wasn't handing any out. So, Tuesday evening, I put on my least wrinkled polo and drove to the Grant Street Community Recreation Facility, which looked exactly like every rec center built after 1978. Tan bricks, flickering fluorescent lighting, and a front desk staffed by someone who clearly lost a bet. The guy behind the desk had a man bun and the energy of someone who says, "Vibe check," unironically. I asked if there was a way to sign up for the performance group, and he gave me a once-over like he was trying to decide if I was there to audit or sabotage. "You mean the Tuesday players?" he asked. "Sure. That sounds needlessly fancy." "Yeah, that." He handed me a form and a pencil so dull it could only be used for menacing. I filled it out while he watched an episode of some cooking competition on his phone, volume fully cranked. A woman appeared from the hallway and waved at me like I was late to a family reunion I hadn't agreed to attend. Her name was Celeste. She wore a paisley headband and had the posture of someone who once read a book on interpretive dance and took it personally. "You must be Gary," she chirped. "Come on in. You're just in time for warm-ups." I followed her into a room filled with folding chairs, collapsible platforms, and people who either retired early or never got tired of attention. A man was balancing on one foot while reciting lines from what sounded like a rejected soap opera. Another woman was doing something with scarves that I'm pretty sure wasn't legal in 4 states. Then I saw him. Darryl. He was sitting in a brown leather chair like it was a throne. The mustache was real, majestic even. He had a notepad in one hand and a pencil in the other, as if this gathering of enthusiastic amateurs required formal evaluations. "Ah," he said when he saw me. "You must be Shirley's husband." The room froze. I mean, as much as a room full of unpaid actors can freeze. Someone dropped a scarf. Celeste blinked like I'd just said something in another language. "Yup," I said, nodding like I was at a company barbecue. "That's me. Gary, spouse of Shirley, amateur plumbing enthusiast, big fan of object permanence and paying taxes." Darryl smiled in that way that made me want to check my wallet. "Shirley's told us so much about you." "Really? That's funny. She hasn't mentioned you once outside of explaining your mustache." Someone laughed nervously. Darryl didn't. Instead, he stood up and offered me a handshake I ignored just long enough to be polite but weird. Celeste clapped her hands. "Okay, let's pair up and run the scene from Act 2, the brunch pact." I got partnered with a woman named Rena who looked like she taught geometry in the daytime and cursed at her plants in the evening. She handed me a script that smelled faintly like incense and last week's regrets. Now, I didn't come here to act. I came here to observe. But you can't exactly lurk around a room of people pretending to be muffins and waffles without someone asking you to join in. So I read my lines with all the enthusiasm of a man reading tax code, while keeping an eye on Darryl and his rotating orbit of admirers. At the end of the session, they all gathered in a circle like a low-budget cult. Celeste asked us to share our energies. I shared mine by pretending to get a phone call. On the way out, Darryl pulled me aside near the vending machines. "You're probably wondering what all this means," he said, like he was about to pitch a pyramid scheme. "I was just hoping to get a decent bag of pretzels," I replied. He smiled again, this time slower. "Look, man to man, Shirley's incredible. Talented. Passionate. She's really found her rhythm here. Right? Because rhythm's what was missing from our marriage," I said. He didn't flinch. "You seem like a guy who plays things pretty straight." "No offense. None taken. I actually run a small business that customizes coat hangers. Living on the edge." Darryl laughed like I was joking. I wasn't. "Well, anyway," he said, clapping me on the shoulder in a way that made me wish I had worn a thicker shirt. "Good to have you on the team." "Sure," I replied. "I'm sure I'll remember this when I eventually write my memoir titled Scenes from a Marriage and Other Tax Deductions." By the time I got home, Shirley was already curled up on the couch watching a documentary about Scandinavian crime statistics. "How was your evening?" she asked, without looking up. "Oh, enlightening," I said, kicking off my shoes. "You know me, just exploring my creative side. Joined a group. We're doing improv about waffles and midlife crises." She paused. "You went to the rec center?" I did. She looked at me then, really looked. Not surprised. Not angry. Just assessing. Like she was trying to decide if I was bluffing or just finally catching up. "Make any friends?" she asked. "Well, I met Darryl," I said, sitting beside her and grabbing the remote. "Seems nice. Real big on chairs." She didn't say anything after that. Just turned back to the TV. And I sat there, not angry. Not even sad. Because I hadn't learned the truth yet. Not fully. But I knew one thing now. Whatever this performance fellowship was, it had less to do with theater and a whole lot more to do with the person Shirley became when she thought I wasn't paying attention. And the next act? That was mine. There's something unsettling about a person who doesn't flinch when they're caught. I'm not talking about someone who fakes confusion or overcompensates with cheerful denial. I mean someone who just keeps brushing their teeth like you didn't just mention you joined their amateur acting club under a fake name and stood next to their mustache theater crush during a trust fall exercise called emotional hatching. That's what Shirley did. The day after my first and last performance rehearsal at the rec center, I brought it up again over laundry, casually, like one might mention a weather pattern or a new pothole. She nodded, folded a towel, and asked if I thought dark socks were appropriate for spring. The absence of reaction was so complete, I started to wonder if she had staged an elaborate internal blackout protocol. Maybe every time I said Darryl, her brain rerouted to a mental screensaver. Either that or she really believed I was too fooled to piece together community drama with non-community consequences. So, since the passive-aggressive route was clearly not giving me results, I decided to do what no husband wants to do and few admit. I opened her office cabinet. Now, this was no small thing. Shirley's office was her temple. She didn't call it that, but she arranged her stapler with more discipline than most military operations. Her binders were labeled in all caps, color-coded, and alphabetized. If there was a reality show about controlling your environment through office supplies, she'd be the season finale. She also had this way of talking about privacy like it was sacred until she wanted to go through my glove box or rifle through my sock drawer because something smelled off. So I figured, by Shirley logic, opening a cabinet wasn't trespassing. It was atmospheric balancing. Inside the cabinet were exactly 23 binders. No exaggeration. I counted. There were binders for house bills, for vacation planning, for recipes she never made, and one ominously labeled admin. That one intrigued me. Admin could be anything. Passwords, budgeting, a weird diary formatted as a spreadsheet. I had to know. I opened it. First tab was labeled Performance Schedules. Okay, fine. She's organized. Harmless. Second tab, Costume Inventory. A little strange, considering she told me she was just helping with logistics. There were fabric swatches stapled to the page. No normal person staples fabric. Third tab. Character notes. Darryl. I blinked. Not once. 3 times. I'm a 3-blink kind of man when I see something stupid. The page had Darryl's name at the top, underlined twice. Below it were bullet points. Improvises well under pressure. Prefers low lighting in emotional scenes. Thinks avocado is overrated, lol. Once cried during scene work, raw. Has trust issues but masks it with jokes. Would be good as Ben in Act 3 if he gets comfortable. I stared at the page like it owed me money. Who documents another grown adult like this? Shirley had turned this man into a character study, like he was a troubled contestant on a dating show that only aired in her head. There were 4 more pages just like that. Observations. Strengths. Vocal tone during act I seems nervous but controlled. I'm not even sure what act I was. There were no romantic hearts or lipstick marks. Nothing overt. But you don't analyze a man's vocal range and emotional fragility unless you're either writing a memoir or preparing to sabotage a marriage. I closed the binder and put everything back perfectly, because if Shirley noticed a single tab out of place, she'd launch a full internal audit. I didn't say anything that night, or the next, but I started collecting. Not revenge, not even proof, just pieces. The next piece came on a Thursday, when Shirley said she had a meeting at the community board about funding opportunities. I had just come back from the post office, where I'd endured a 40-minute conversation with an employee about envelope glue and whether it was edible. My tolerance for nonsense was low. Funding for what? I asked, standing at the door with the enthusiasm of a damp rag. For the players, she said, zipping up a cardigan like she was preparing for a war waged in lowercase voices. What are you funding? Cardboard waffles. She gave me that look. The one where she pretended to find me amusing, even though she clearly wished she'd married someone with fewer questions and more neck scarves. It's important, she said. We're expanding the program. Uh-huh, I replied. Expanding it to what? Interpretive omelets? Mime pancakes. She left without answering. At this point, I wasn't angry. I wasn't betrayed. I was curious. I was starting to feel like a bored detective assigned to a really low-stakes mystery. The kind where the worst that could happen is someone's feelings get mildly bruised and someone else cries during a trust exercise about feelings and fondue. 2 nights later, I decided to visit the rec center again. This time, I didn't enter. I waited in my car, parked across the street, sipping a gas station soda and listening to a podcast about tree diseases. Around 6:45 p.m., Shirley pulled in. Her car had that sound it makes when she turns too hard, kind of a metallic whimper. She got out, clutching a duffel bag that looked heavier than usual. Then Darryl pulled in behind her. He got out, waved at her in a way that no man waves at someone he doesn't think about too much. Shirley waved back. She touched his elbow. Not a hug, not a kiss, just a brief touch. But it was the kind of touch you save for people you think about when you're not supposed to. And that's when it stopped being funny. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even surprising. It was just clear. The binder wasn't a one-time weird project. The theater wasn't about theater. The reason she wasn't flustered when I brought it up? It's because it didn't feel like a threat. I wasn't part of that world. Not really. I was just the guy who paid for the printer ink. That night, I started my own binder. Except mine wasn't labeled. And it didn't have tabs or colors. It just had a plan. Because Shirley could collect notes and analyze stage partners, all she wanted. But I knew how to document, too. And my Act 3? It wasn't going to involve any props. The thing about Shirley is, she's not reckless. Not in the traditional, breaking stuff and running from fire sort of way. Her recklessness is quieter. Administrative. The kind that wears cardigans and makes spreadsheets with color-coded tabs, while slowly unraveling the stability of shared taxes and a mortgage. She doesn't forget passwords, but she will forget to mention she's emotionally entangled with a man who once gave a 15-minute speech about the symbolic value of shoelaces during a scene rehearsal. It was Saturday, which meant Shirley was facilitating a creative workshop at the rec center. Apparently, it was about creative vulnerability or unlocking your authentic performance voice, depending on which flyer you read. I was still debating whether that phrase had any meaning or was just a word salad assembled by someone who thought eye contact was a personality trait. I wasn't invited, of course, but I signed up anyway, under a fake name. Harold. I picked it because it was dull, forgettable, and somehow felt like the name of a man who once tried acting in high school, but ended up selling tires instead. Signing up was surprisingly easy. There was a clipboard in the front lobby, next to a bowl of peppermints no one ever touched and a poster about blood pressure screenings. I wrote Harold Benson in the last slot available and added a little star next to my name. Not for flair, just to irritate whoever managed the attendance list. The workshop was held in the multi-purpose room, which was really just code for the large space with too many fold-out tables, industrial beige walls, and an echo that amplified every sneeze into something operatic. There were 9 other people there. Mostly the regulars, Scarf Lady, the guy who always overcommit during warm-ups and nearly pulled his hamstring, and of course, Darryl, who had apparently promoted himself to co-lead facilitator. He wore a maroon pullover and carried a clipboard like he was preparing for a very sensitive mission. Then Shirley entered. She didn't see me at first. I was seated at the far end of the circle, behind someone wearing a hat large enough to double as a beach umbrella. She greeted the group like a local congresswoman trying to win back undecided voters, thanking everyone for bravely showing up and creating space for each other. I was already regretting the decision, not because I had a change of heart, but because I hadn't brought anything to fidget with. I was stuck with nothing but my own hands and a laminated handout titled, Reclaiming the Voice of Your Inner Monologue. The first hour of the workshop consisted of guided journaling, which is code for writing vague emotional confessions in bullet points, while someone plays instrumental guitar tracks on a speaker that skips every 4th note. Everyone leaned into it. Some people even cried a little. One woman shared a story about how she once choked during a high school choir solo and never recovered from it emotionally. Darryl called it soul reclamation. I called it Tuesday. Then came the sharing circle. People took turns reading their journal entries, and the rest of the group responded by snapping their fingers or whispering, "Thank you for sharing." I stayed silent. Harold was a listener, a watcher, a man with nothing to prove and everything to observe. When it was Darryl's turn, he cleared his throat dramatically and said, "I've been thinking about connection. The kind that's unexpected but deeply familiar. When you meet someone and you feel like they were already part of your life, you just hadn't realized it yet." Shirley didn't look at him, but she also didn't look away. She folded her hands in her lap, like someone preparing to either receive a compliment or pretend not to hear one. He continued, "Sometimes you find those people in unlikely places, in scenes, in shared glances during rehearsals. You don't need history with them. You just need presence." The group murmured like a well-trained audience. A few people nodded. One person teared up and said, "That's so real." I stared at the wall. Eventually, Shirley stood up. "Let's close with a mirroring exercise," she said, which I knew meant standing awkwardly in pairs while mimicking each other's movements. I was paired with a woman named Cheryl who told me she'd been a clown for birthday parties before she decided her calling was movement therapy. She was nice, smelled vaguely like eucalyptus, and had no idea I was actually spying on my own wife under an alias that sounded like someone's uncle from Akron. After the workshop ended, everyone milled around like post-wedding guests. Shirley moved through the room with her clipboard, offering affirmations and eye contact that lasted just long enough to feel choreographed. I hung back, flipping through one of the unused handouts and trying to look mildly engaged. Then I heard her. "Darryl, do you have the new binder? The one with the scene pairings?" He handed it to her like he was giving away a rare manuscript. She flipped to a page, nodded, then said quietly, "Let's go over it later, just us." It was the tone that caught me, not the words. The way she said it like it was normal, like it had been normal for a while. That was all I needed. I left before they saw me. Back at home, I sat in the garage again. Same spot where I'd first found the red bin. The garbage disposal still didn't work, and I didn't care. The house was quiet, and Shirley would be home late, as usual, citing some vague reason involving post-workshop debriefing or emotional resets. I didn't wait up. The next morning, I printed something. It wasn't a note. It wasn't a dramatic letter. It wasn't even passive-aggressive. It was a sign-up sheet, just like the one at the rec center. But this one was for our house. Title, Future Scene Assignments. Below that were 2 columns. One said, Gary solo role. Project, Personal Autonomy. The other said, Shirley, pending availability due to scheduling conflicts with her emotional support thespian. I left it on the fridge. She saw it the next day, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't have anything to say. There's a level of quiet that only exists between two people who are pretending nothing's changed. It's not silence, exactly. It's the overcompensated small talk, the slightly too loud throat clears, the sudden enthusiasm about the mail. That's where Shirley and I landed. Two adults enthusiastically ignoring an elephant in the living room that we both knew had a name, a clipboard, and a 3-page acting resume written in Comic Sans. The sign-up sheet taped to the fridge had remained untouched for 3 days. She saw it every time she grabbed her oat milk or rearranged the magnets that spelled out, "We believe in kindness," which, I had to admit, was now reading like a tough little prank from the universe. Shirley didn't mention it. Not directly. She did start using more passive phrasing, though. Instead of saying she was going to the rec center, it became, "There's a group thing later." Instead of scene workshop, it was they needed help with some stuff. At one point she just said, "I'm out tonight." I started replying with phrases like, "Hope your stuff with some group goes well," and "Tell the clipboard crew I said hello." She didn't laugh, which made it better. Then came the email. Not sent. Drafted. I wasn't snooping. I want that on the record. I wasn't lurking through her laptop, typing her password in like a cartoon villain. I was trying to book an oil change online because the mechanic's phone line had started looping their hold music into a haunting 6-second beat that I now heard in my sleep. I asked if I could use her laptop because mine had decided to update for the 3rd time that week and had developed the personality of a vengeful librarian. She handed it over without a second thought, like nothing I could possibly do with her computer would be of interest. That was her mistake. I typed "oil change appointment near me" into the browser, and her email was already logged in. That wasn't suspicious. We share a network, sometimes even groceries. But there, in the top right corner, was the word "drafts," with a little red number 2 next to it. Now, I'm not a saint. I'm not someone who walks past a glowing red notification like it's not whispering my name. I clicked. First draft, board meeting outline. Snooze. Second draft, things that need saying. That one opened itself, emotionally speaking. It was a message addressed to no one. Just sitting there, raw and indecisive. "Gary, I'm not sure what version of this I'll ever send, if any. But I'm writing it anyway, because eventually something has to be said, and I'd rather not stammer my way through it while you stare at me like I'm submitting a tax form written in crayon. So here's the deal. I didn't mean for it to be a thing. I didn't go looking for anything. I didn't wake up one day and say, 'You know what this marriage needs? Unscheduled drama and a man who wears indoor scarves.' But Darryl, yeah, you can stop pretending you didn't know. He showed up in this strange space where I felt useful again. Like I wasn't just checking boxes or coordinating sock drawers. You were always steady, solid, reliable. I thought that's what I needed. Maybe I still do. But somewhere along the way I stopped feeling seen, and someone else walked in with a spotlight and a clipboard and said, 'Hey, I see you.' I don't even know what this all is. I don't know what I want it to become, but it exists, and I've let it exist. And now here we are, navigating this weird performance where I know you know, but nobody says anything. I don't expect you to forgive it. I'm not even asking. I'm just trying to get the words out of my system before I implode. Shirley, P.S. If you actually read this one day, I hope you know I still care about you, even if I haven't shown it well." I stared at the screen for a full minute before closing the tab. Didn't copy it. Didn't take a photo. Just read it and let it live in my head. There it was. Not quite a confession. Not quite a plan. More like a soft apology written in neutral tones. That night, I didn't bring it up. Instead, I started phase 2 of my strategy. See, Shirley wasn't the only one who could dabble in indirect communication. I'm a licensed adult with full access to printers and public domain clip art. I created a flyer. At the top, new scene, marriage redraft, auditions now open. Below that, a list. Must be comfortable working in emotionally inconsistent environments. Ability to handle passive aggression with grace. Light prop work required, mostly bills, laundry, sarcastic notes. Must not currently be emotionally entangled with clipboard enthusiasts. Then, at the bottom, inquire within, garage office hours 7 to 7:15 p.m., weekdays only. I taped it inside her closet door, just far enough back that she'd find it by accident while reaching for her 6th favorite sweater. The next morning, I heard her rustling around in there. Then silence. Then the faint sound of her sitting down on the edge of the bed. Still, no words. That afternoon, I started a new shared calendar and titled it The Great Unscripted Separation of Roles. I put garage office, act breaks at 7 p.m. She didn't accept the invite, but she didn't decline it either. We were making progress. The slow, ridiculous kind. Tuesdays used to be our laundry night. Now they were more like silent film screenings where no one got popcorn, but there was plenty of tension and lots of socks. Shirley still folded with surgical precision, lining up sleeves like they were auditioning for military service. I, on the other hand, started throwing my shirts into the drawer diagonally just to see if it would eventually cause her to twitch. It did, for the record. Week 2, she reorganized everything while pretending to look for a receipt. We were still in the house, still sharing the same toothpaste, still taking turns refilling the water filter like model citizens. But under the surface, things had shifted into a kind of structured unraveling. She no longer asked where I was going when I left the room. I no longer pretended to care when she muttered phrases like scene review or blocking rehearsal. We had developed a truce based on mutual disengagement and mild sarcasm, and it was time to end it. I didn't want a dramatic exit. I didn't want yelling or confessions or some grand reveal involving a handwritten letter tucked under a pillow. I wanted it to feel like returning a library book, methodical, overdue, and oddly satisfying. So I created an exit survey. Typed, printed, stapled. 3 pages. No decorative fonts. Just honest-to-goodness practical questions to guide us through the final chapter of our highly experimental cohabitation. Page 1 was titled, Feedback regarding shared domestic arrangement. Please circle 1. How satisfied were you with the overall trajectory of this relationship? A. Very satisfied. B. Somewhat satisfied. C. Occasionally confused but appreciative of your towel folding. D. I joined a performance collective instead of saying how I felt. Page 2 had multiple choice scenarios. If you found yourself emotionally attached to someone named Darryl who hosts workshops on emotional mime, would you A. Seek counseling. B. Reevaluate your creative circle. C. Pretend Gary doesn't notice. D. All of the above. Then, the final page. Suggestions for improvement, open response. Please describe, in 50 words or fewer, what you would do differently next time if you were co-starring in a long-term domestic partnership. I left the packet on the dining table, right under her reusable shopping list. She found it the next morning. I heard a snort. She read the first 2 pages in silence, then laughed at the line about emotionally mime. That was my moment of triumph. A small one, sure, but I took it. That night, she sat on the couch, notepad in hand. I filled out your survey, she said. You didn't sign it, I replied. She shrugged. Anonymous feedback promotes honesty. I read her answers later in the garage. They were direct, annoyingly thoughtful, and mostly accurate. Apparently, I weaponized silence like a sitcom dad who'd given up on dinner conversation, and I lacked enthusiasm for her creative pursuits, which I found rich coming from someone who once rolled her eyes so hard during my attempt at amateur woodworking that I thought she'd pulled something. But buried near the end, in the margin next to the final question, she'd scribbled, we had a good run. Somewhere between IKEA assembly and joint tax filings, we forgot to reroute. Thanks for keeping the printer stocked. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't emotional. But it was her. And it was enough. We agreed on everything without saying much. She'd stay with her sister until she figured out where to go next. I'd keep the house, mostly because I liked my garage office and already had full custody of the Wi-Fi password. We divided our shared accounts with less argument than we had over whose turn it was to replace the shower liner. On her last day in the house, she packed with ruthless efficiency. Color-coded luggage tags, numbered boxes, a literal spreadsheet printout of what she was taking and what she was leaving for functional continuity, which is how she referred to the toaster. Before she walked out, she paused by the door. No big speech, just looked at me and said, I didn't plan any of this, you know. I nodded. I know. Most improv gets away from you. Then she left. No tears. No hugs. Just the sound of the door closing. A week later, I received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a t-shirt with the phrase, scene partner, retired. I hung it in the garage. Not as a keepsake. Just as a reminder. Sometimes, it's better when the curtains close early. And honestly, I never liked her scene notes anyway. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel